Hello. I'm your storyteller tonight. And I'm here, in this silence, to share fragments of memories, echoes from long nights that seem to never end. Perhaps you are listening to this as the night deepens, when the world outside has fallen silent. Relax, find a comfortable position, and let my voice lead you into hidden corners, where reality is sometimes more fragile than we think. Tonight, the air seems to have an unusual weight. Doesn't it? It's as if there's an invisible pressure weighing on all of us. A stillness filled with unsaid things. I remember that first night very clearly. My house at that time was quite modest, nestled in a quiet, seemingly sleepy suburban area. A small strip of grass, a few fences surrounding it. Everything is so normal that it's boring. But I especially love the wooden porch in front of the house. The old boards had a unique creak every time someone stepped on them. A sound that, strangely enough, I used to find comforting. At least until the night when all familiar feelings of security were gone. I have never doubted my safety here. This neighborhood is so peaceful that almost nothing happens. But that night, I heard them for the first time, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing on my porch in the middle of the night. Start, not sure what time it was. The house was engulfed in darkness, with only the weak light from the street lamps filtering through the curtains, drawing faint streaks of light on the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. A gentle, almost cautious, creak of the wooden panel just outside the front door. I stiffened on the bed, my breath caught in my throat. Adrenaline began to rush through my veins. Who could be out there at this hour? I held my breath, straining my ears to listen, trying to find any more clues. A voice, a cough, any indication of who, or what, standing on my porch. The sound of footsteps. A moment later, when the sound suddenly stopped, I forced myself to sit up. My hand trembled as I fumbled to turn on the small light next to the couch in the living room. The warm yellow light spread, dispelling some of the darkness, but it could not dispel the fear that was gripping me tightly. I was half expecting and half afraid to see a figure through the window, but there was only my own reflection looking back, the pale face, confused and trembling eyes. Mustering up all my remaining courage, I tiptoed out the main door. My heart pounded so hard against my ribs that it felt like it was about to burst. I pressed my eyes to the peephole. Outside is empty. There was no movement, no one. There was only the quiet night, and a single porch light illuminating a small courtyard. But there was a vague feeling, a prickly awareness that someone, or something, was still very close. Right out of sight. Waiting. My muscles tensed with the urge to yank the door open, to face whatever was lurking. But a sudden chill ran down my spine, making me flinch. Even though I was scared, I still needed to know what was going on. I needed confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. So, I took a deep breath, turned the lock and pulled the latch. The door slowly opened. The porch is empty. The night is empty. A stream of cool air passed over my skin, making me shiver. The porch light flickered strangely, creating dancing, distorted shadows across the yard. My eyes scanned the darkness, trying to pierce the darkness. And then I saw it. At the edge of the light, near the sidewalk, a dim figure stood there. Not really a person in the usual sense. It was tall, skinny, almost just a solid black outline cutting into the night sky. It seemed to be looking straight at me, disturbingly motionless. The dim light made it impossible to see the face clearly, or whether it had a face at all. But its posture exuded a menacing stillness. Switch, the one that illuminated the walkway. I wanted to see more clearly. wanted to identify that shape. But the moment the stronger light swept across the yard, that figure disappeared. Disappears into the air. Only the bushes were left, gently swaying, even though there was not a single breeze. My stomach cramped. That's just the beginning. The next day, I tried to tell a friend about it over the phone, trying to force a smile to hide the insecurity that still lingered. I said that perhaps it was just a random passerby, or perhaps a figment of the half-conscious imagination. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't my imagination. There's something out there. It knows I'm here. And I had the feeling that it was watching me. The following nights, my sleep became restless and full of anxiety. Every slightest creak of the old wooden planks on the porch made me shiver in fear. Many times, I jumped up from bed, my heart racing, sure that I heard footsteps again. But every time I checked, turning on the flashlight to shine across the yard, I found nothing but emptiness and the familiar oppressive silence. The night air seemed thick, as if the whole world around me was holding its breath, waiting with me. Many days passed without the figure's reappearance. A small part of me began to hope that whatever I had seen, or thought I had seen, had gone away. But that hope is fragile. About a week later, I was awakened from my restless sleep by another sound. This time it wasn't footsteps. It sounded like claws, or fingernails, scratching on wood. A dry, sharp sound. My whole body convulsed with fear. My mouth went dry immediately. I groped for the flashlight on the nightstand, knocking it over in my trembling. When it finally turned on, a narrow beam of light cut through the darkness of the bedroom. My breath echoed loudly in the overwhelming silence. I tiptoed to the main door again, hesitant. The scratching sound, which had been so clear before, was now silent. Gathering all my remaining courage, I opened the door a crack, preparing to face whatever was out there. Again, the awning looks normal. The wooden planks did not appear to be damaged. I didn't see any creatures or intruders lurking. But the atmosphere felt stuffier and more frustrated than ever. I'm reminded of those old sayings in. It sounds cliché, but in that moment, it was the only way to describe this feeling. I could have sworn I was being observed from some hidden location. My mind flashed the image of that tall, thin shadow, perhaps hiding behind the fence, crouching and waiting. The next morning, determined to shake off my growing paranoia, I circled the front yard, searching for signs. Any trace, shoe prints, animal tracks, something so I could attribute this horror to a tangible cause, human or animal. And I found it. Faint tracks led from the sidewalk to the porch. They were strange, almost elongated, but not quite so deformed that I could immediately identify them. Not like normal shoe prints. Not really animal prints. They led up the steps, circled around the porch, near a pillar, and then suddenly disappeared between the boards. There was no trace of continuing out, no sign of returning. It was as if the uninvited guest had lifted itself off the ground, or vanished into thin air right at that point. My stomach turned again. I tried to tell myself that it must be a trick of the light, or perhaps incomplete traces that had faded away. But deep inside, I felt my rational explanations slipping away, leaving behind a cold fear. From that point on, my nights took on a different rhythm. Instead of trying to fall asleep, I lay awake, listening to every creak and every little groan of the house. The silence outside was no longer peaceful, but an unusual, tense stillness that gave me goosebumps. Every once in a while, I would stand up, lift the curtain and look out, scanning the yard for movement. The streetlights seemed to flicker more often, Now, or perhaps I was simply more aware of every little fluctuation. The shadows changed shape constantly, always at the edge of my vision, and disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on them. On one of those nights, I caught a glimpse of something near the bushes. A short figure, as if crouching. My throat tightened, and I felt my heartbeat pound against my ribs. Without realizing it, one hand was pressed firmly against my chest, as if trying to calm the erratic beating. I squinted, desperately searching for any detail, an arm, a face. But it was just a dark, indistinct shape, like a twisted branch or a hunched figure. The longer I looked, the more I felt it was staring at me. My mind screamed at me to back away, to turn off the lights, to do anything other than stand there, exposed to that invisible gaze. But I can't move. Cold sweat broke out at my temples, and my feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. It felt like hours passed before the shape shifted slightly and retreated deeper into the darkness, dissolving once more. Only then was the tension in my muscles released, causing me to tremble uncontrollably. Dawn broke. I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I began to doubt my own sanity. Are these visions real? Or am I succumbing to some kind of stress-induced hallucination? But even that rationalization feels hollow. Because deep down, I knew there was something more. The footprints ended abruptly. The sound of scratching on the porch. An unnatural presence loomed behind the fence. These were not the actions of a simple intruder. I tried to confide in a neighbor, tremblingly mentioning that I had been hearing strange noises at night. The neighbor appeared half concerned, half confused, then suggested that it might just be a raccoon rummaging around. I nodded politely, but I didn't believe it. And even as I recounted my ordeal, I found my voice faltering and lacking conviction. The sheer strangeness of it makes me sound like someone who is losing his mind. I was secretly hoping that speaking out might ease my fear, but it only emphasized how alone I felt facing this. Several more nights passed with the same unnerving routine, heavy silence, mounting tension in every joint, and the subtle but unmistakable feeling of being watched. Then one evening, I heard the scratching sound again. But this time is different. It was more frantic, more intense. As if something was trying to dig and get under below porch boards. My skin crawled with goosebumps from the urgency, the violence in that sound. This time, instead of rushing out the door, I remained inside, pressing my ear against the wooden floor near the door, trying to figure out what the creature was doing. I could feel slight vibrations passing through the floor. Panic flooded my system. Adrenaline skyrocketed, making my breathing difficult and rapid. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth from biting my lips too hard. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? Is there something invisible crawling around under my eaves at night? They'll think I'm crazy. Finally, the scratching noise stopped. Perhaps an hour had passed, or perhaps just 5 minutes, in my agitated state. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. When I finally dared to open the door, the night was as dark, silent, and empty as ever. The beam of my flashlight. Deep cuts, definitely not there before. They looked like sharp claw marks, each about an inch or two long, piercing through the old wood. Terror froze in my gut. That's when I detected movement near the bushes. That form has returned. A streak of solid black contrasted with the surrounding darkness. It stood there, terrifyingly motionless, but not making a sound. There was no discernible movement except a slight, almost imperceptible shift. That indicated it was turning to look at me. I slammed the door shut, my heart about to jump out of my throat. For a long time, I stood frozen in the entrance, my hand clutching the doorknob. sweat pouring out. Then I hastily locked all the latches. But even that didn't give me any sense of security. I turned on every light in the house, hoping the light could dispel the darkness and that invisible presence. The living room lamp cast harsh light on the bare walls, further revealing how alone I truly was in this war. My mind was spinning with chaotic thoughts. Should I leave? Should I stay up all night? What if I try to face it? That night, I couldn't sleep. Whenever I close my eyes, I see that figure behind my eyelids. I felt ghostly claws clawing at my consciousness. I kept imagining the porch boards being ripped apart. And something crawling up from underneath. My reason began to crumble. Replaced by primal fear. Every little noise startled me. Each shadow becomes a potential threat. I have never felt so vulnerable in my own home. In desperation, I spent the next day reinforcing the awning. I tacked up any boards that seemed loose. I even spread a thin layer of flour on the steps in the area near the door, in the faint hope of capturing clearer footprints if the entity returned. My nerves are always as tense as guitar strings. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting and half afraid to skin, seemingly unable to completely dispel the fear that was embedded deep in my bones. Night falls again, inevitably. I sat by the window. Turned off all the lights in the house, trying to stay calm enough to observe. The flower on the porch shined faintly under the weak porch light. Around midnight, the boards creaked again. My chest tightened. It happened again. But this time, I refused to rush out the door. Instead, I stood behind the curtains, looking out. The creak moved slowly across the porch, as if something was pacing back and forth, prowling. Then I heard the soft scratching again, a sound that made my ears ring with tension. My breathing was sporadic and shallow. After a while, carefully out the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm sure I'll see footprints in the flower. What I saw made my stomach turn. There really are footprints. But they were elongated tracks. Closer to animal tracks than human ones, but they didn't match any animal I knew of. They crawl through the flower on the porch. And then, midway through, they simply ended. There are no steps forward. No signs of turning back. Just a sudden stop right in the middle of the planks. It was as if the creature had disappeared into thin air. A cold wave of terror spread through my body. My vision was blurry at the edges. And my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I feel like I'm standing precariously on the edge of reality. There is no reasonable explanation for something that could disappear into thin air like that. My mind reeled with horrifying possibilities. Is this entity bound by the laws of nature? Could it come and go as it pleased, taunting me from another dimension? Out onto the porch. The planks groaned under my weight, as if mimicking the footsteps that had haunted me for so long. I took a few quick photos of the strange footprints in the flower and fresh claw marks in the wood. I want proof that I'm not insane. In the faint circle of light from the porch light, I could see the disturbed flower where the trail ended, as if the last footprint belonged to some ghostly presence that had simply vanished. Suddenly, the bushes nearby rustled. Louder this time. I turned around in surprise. It's there. The shadow. Stand right outside the porch railing, half hidden behind the foliage. It was taller than I thought, its limbs seemed unusually long. Or perhaps it was covered by a long cloak. My throat tightened. My legs screamed at me to run, but I remained rooted to the spot. Slowly, almost tentatively, as if gauging my reaction, the shape leaned forward. I felt its eyes boring into me, even though I couldn't see them. A wave of primal, instinctive fear coursed through me. My entire body was covered in cold sweat, and I was panting. I couldn't look away, even though every cell in my body wanted to. In a moment of frantic determination, I raised my camera, trying to capture an image of it. But immediately, the figure slid deeper into the darkness, completely obscured by the dense foliage. There was a flash of movement, then only the tree branches gently swayed in the dead silence of the night. My chest heaved with ragged breaths. I almost collapsed from extreme stress. Finally, I forced myself back inside, locked the door and slid to the floor, my back against the cold door. The camera was still clutched tightly in trembling, sweaty hands. I never got a clear picture of that thing. But the footprints in the flour and the splinters of wood on the porch were enough evidence to remind me that it was real. Or something close to the real thing. I considered leaving. Refused to give up my home. The terror still lingers, hanging in the air. Even now, as I recite these lines, I can still feel an uncomfortable prickling sensation along my neck, as if invisible eyes were staring at me from the darkness. I haven't heard any scratching noises in a few days. And I haven't seen anyone behind the bushes either. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was gone forever. But sometimes, late at night, when the silence becomes too heavy, I find myself listening, my heart pounding in my ears, certain that I'm about to hear the familiar, frighteningly soothing creak of the porch boards. Every now and then, I would peek out the window, only to notice a fleeting figure retreating into the darkness behind the fence. In those moments, a chilling realization hit me. This presence, whatever it is, may not be bound by conventional logic. Maybe it was just a projection of my own fears, a ghost created by the mind. Or perhaps there's something much worse lurking at the edges of reality, occasionally reaching out into our world. I've reached a point where I don't know what to believe anymore. My senses? My sanity? Even the ground beneath my feet no longer seemed solid. But part of me refuses to give in completely. This house may no longer feel from another world, or from a dark corner of my mind, rob me of my courage. Whether it is a supernatural manifestation or a psychological deviation, I am preparing for its return. I decided that if it came back, I would face it again. I don't know if I have any chance, or if confrontation will only make it stronger. All I know is that living in constant terror is not living at all. So here, I forced myself to wait. Every night, my heart was pounding in my chest and my breathing was shallow. Each rustle of leaves sent a rush of adrenaline through my body. I was both scared and determined. Maybe I can find a way to banish this thing. Or maybe I will discover a truth too horrifying to comprehend. But now, I sit here, with my camera by my side, and my eyes fixed on that porch, not knowing whether I am standing on the brink of madness or on the threshold of something beyond, unfathomable. And sometimes, in the deep silence of midnight, I could swear I hear the faint echo of footsteps. A haunting reminder that whatever lurks out there isn't finished with me yet. Sometimes, they find you right in the middle of a noisy crowd, under bright neon lights. I still remember that feeling. That creepy feeling that ran down my spine even before I realized what was happening. It was a summer night festival, the air thick with the smell of fried dough, spiced barbecue, and the excitement of the crowd. I was walking alone, trying to soak up the bustling atmosphere after a stressful week of work. Colorful paper lanterns shimmered on the sidewalk, and festive music echoed from afar, gently hitting my temples. But something is wrong. Even before I realized what not okay, I already felt a slight tension in the atmosphere, as if the night itself was breathing shallowly, waiting for something. My heart was beating faster than it should for a simple festive stroll. The smell of food, instead of stimulating my appetite, somehow increased my vague feeling of nausea. The overhead lights flickered more erratically than usual, and every shadow seemed to elongate, reaching beyond their natural limits. Amidst the laughter and bustle, I felt an uncomfortable itchy feeling on the back of my neck, as if someone was staring at me from afar. I tried to brush off the discomfort, telling myself it was just an overactive imagination, perhaps due to fatigue. But as I weaved through the crowd of strangers, I caught a glimpse of a figure. A tall man stood a few meters away, partially hidden behind a souvenir stand. His posture was stiff, motionless amid the moving crowd. Something about the tilt of his head made my stomach turn. And then I saw it, a faint glint of metal in his hand. A camera, pointed straight at me. At first, I thought I was wrong. Why is someone taking pictures of me among everyone here? At a crowded night festival? But no, the lens was definitely pointed at me. Without a shadow of a doubt. My heartbeat grew louder and faster. A thin layer of sweat began to form on my forehead. I glared at him, hoping my gaze conveyed my annoyance. That I didn't appreciate being the object of his lens. Instead of reacting with the typical startled expression or awkwardly turning away, he just smiled. It was a smile that I cannot easily describe. It's wide, too wide. His lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that seemed too straight, too white, and too bright under the shimmering lantern light. It's not a friendly smile. It was like a taunt, a challenge. It was as if he was daring me to confront him. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I turned around, trying to blend into the crowd, squeezing deeper into the sea of noisily moving strangers. But there is a lingering feeling of insecurity. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was always there, a few feet away, still keeping his distance. Camera still in hand. A few steps later, I stopped near a stall displaying colorful ribbons, a waterfall of color. My vision was overwhelmed by the swirling patterns, but I still managed to catch another glimpse of him. He stood just outside the silk that was fluttering in the breeze. He raised his camera again. Take another photo. My whole body is tense. My hands were sticky with cold sweat, and the back of my neck was slick with anxiety. Why is he so intent on following me? I walked quickly aside, hoping to blend in with a group of people admiring the handicrafts. But a quick glance to my right confirmed that he was still there. Despite the loud music and countless people jostling around, I felt completely alone and isolated in that stuffy crowd. Desperate to regain some control, I pulled out my phone. I decided to take a photo of him as proof of this bizarre harassment, if needed. My heart pounded in my ears as the camera app opened. But my hands were shaking so violently that it was almost impossible to hold the phone still to focus on his form. When I pressed the shutter button, the results that appeared on the screen were strange. The photo is blurry and unclear, especially his face. It was like a blur, a distortion, as if my phone was trying and failing to get a clear picture of him. I tried again a few more times. Each attempt produced the same result, a strange blur where his face should have been. My breathing became uneven and rapid. A heavy feeling in my chest made me wonder if I was imagining things, or if there was some technical glitch going on, or perhaps something else. Determined not to let fear paralyze me, I decided to look directly at him again. I turned completely around, intending to confront him from afar with my eyes. This time, I noticed a strange distortion in the space around his head. It was like a shimmering wave of heat rising from the asphalt on a hot day. Except it was night, and the effect seemed to stick especially well with him. His smile seemed to get bigger and bigger, and it looked even more unnatural than before. My breath caught as I realized that perhaps I was seeing something that should not exist in a normal rational world. A wave of confusion and nausea washed over me. I felt my heartbeat pounding so hard that I was sure he could see my chest rising and falling violently. In a panic, I heard a group of people nearby chatting about some show that was about to take place in the next block. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe I should join them, pretend to be part of their group, just to get out of his sight. I moved closer to them. But the crowd moved unpredictably. A swirl of confetti suddenly fell from above as a small parade of dancers passed by. Brightly colored pieces of paper fluttered in the night sky, but to me, they seemed somehow wrong. As if they were mocking my insecurities. In the swirl of people and paper, I lost sight of the man for a moment. A wave of relief washed over me, until I felt the familiar prickling sensation return to my spine. He's still there. Doesn't disappear, just changes location. Every time I tried to confront him head-on, he would sneak into a dark alley or hide behind another stall. Every time I moved, he moved too. Always keeping a certain distance, always in my peripheral vision. The hot wave of anxiety in my stomach rose higher and higher. I became more aware of each rapid breath, each drop of sweat flowing down my temples. My mouth was so dry that at times I could barely swallow. I heard the faint click of his camera's shutter again. I turned around just in time to see him lower his camera. His eyes, I couldn't make out the color, but they seemed strangely bright with excitement, the satisfaction of having taken another picture. Distant, almost out of tune, like a broken soundtrack in an unsettling film. Real. I decided I had to end this obsessive game of cat and mouse. Forcing my shaky legs to move, I walked straight towards him. The crowd seemed to part for a moment, giving me a clearer view. I speed up. But strangely, with every step I took forward, he seemed to drift further away. As if the crowd was intentionally swallowing him up every time I got too close. The bustling cheers from the festival mixed with my rapid, panting breaths. My chest felt tight, and a heavy pressure pressed down on me from all sides. It seemed impossible to corner him amid the dancing bodies and flashing neon lights. After several minutes of frantic and fruitless chasing, I discovered him standing under a dimly lit archway near the end of the street where the festivities were beginning to thin out. The air here was thick with smoke from nearby barbecues, and the smell of burning meat made my stomach churn. I approached, my heart pounding so hard that I could hardly think straight. He didn't move. He just stood there waiting, the camera still in his hand. His face partially obscured by the darkness and the strange, faint light shimmering around him. Adrenaline and uncertainty rushed through your veins. I stepped forward, trying to raise my voice. Although afterward I could barely remember what I said. It was something incriminating, demanding to know why he was following me. What he wanted from me. The answer came not in loud words, but in a whisper. A cold whisper like the north wind, stinging my skin. That voice was cold, emotionless, cutting through the chaos of the festival in a sharp and invasive way. He said, in one short sentence, "You don't belong here." The fear was immediate, almost a physical sensation. As if an icy hand had tightened around my heart. The surrounding temperature seemed to plummet, even though it should have been very hot amidst the summer and crowds. His presence radiated a bitter chill, making my limbs tense. In that moment, my mind was racing with thousands of questions. but none of them I could put into words. I took a step closer. Teeth clenched despite the cold and fear. I was going to ask him what he meant. But at that moment, a fleeting movement of the crowd blocked my view for a moment. Just 1 second. When I looked back, the archway was empty. He has disappeared. No trace, no footsteps. Only cold air and the smell of burning flesh remained. My chest rose and fell with each rapid breath. And my palms trembled against my thighs. The bitter cold still lurks deep under my skin. Confusion and fear spread through my body like poison, making it difficult for me to think logically. I frantically scanned the sea of remaining festival-goers, hoping to catch a glimpse of his creepy smile. Or that tall, thin figure. But all I saw were strange smiling faces, flashing neon lights, and swirls of falling confetti. Desperation began to gnaw at me. I tried to push my way through the crowd of strangers, constantly looking over my shoulder, craning my neck in every direction. Fear pounded inside my skull. The scenery around me now seemed unusual, subtly distorted. The light flickered unpredictably, creating long, strange dancing shadows on the ground. The distant music now sounded harsh and cruel, an out-of-place beat, at odds with my own rapid heartbeat. Sometimes I thought I caught a faint silhouette in my peripheral vision, a shape drifting between the stalls. Every time I turned around to face it, I was only greeted by startled strangers who seemed more interested in my seemingly frantic behavior than anything else. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I'm just losing my mind. Perhaps I was seeing visions born of my extreme anxiety. Perhaps the distorted face in the photos is just a technical error due to my shaking hands or poor lighting. However, my mind keeps replaying the moment he whispered those words, "You don't belong here." The deep coldness in his voice still lingers in me. I recall the way his face seemed to shimmer, refusing to be captured by the camera. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize, I knew there was something sinister lurking behind those images, behind that haunting half-smile. A strange dizziness came over me. My breathing became ragged. And my thoughts became paranoid. I scanned every face in the crowd, half convinced that he could be lurking behind any of them, watching me. The entire festival now felt drenched in menacing colors. The lights were so bright, the almost neon intensity hurt my eyes. I found myself tripping over a souvenir table, knocking over a few knickknacks. The salesperson glared at me, but I couldn't even utter an apology. My heart beats too fast. I had an overwhelming feeling, an urge to run away. But I was too scared to leave without answers. At one point, I sought refuge near an old fountain decorated with colorful festive ribbons. The water trickled in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, but it did nothing to settle my frayed nerves. I cupped my hands to catch the water, splashed it on my face, trying to hold on to the cool feeling of the liquid on my skin. For a moment, my mind was a little clearer. I glanced around, determined to find him if he was still nearby. Everything seemed normal in that moment. A group of friends were laughing, vendors were calling customers. Couples were dancing to music in the distance. Only my racing heartbeat told me otherwise. Then, in a flash, I caught a glimpse of him through the water of the fountain. He was partially obscured by a tattered banner advertising some local tourist attraction. My whole body froze. He slowly raised the camera, almost solemnly, and pressed the shutter button. This time, I clearly saw the bright light of the flash. And in that flash of light, his face wavered again. Shape. When the flash ended, he disappeared again into the chaos of noise and light, as if he had never been there. My head was pounding, and a shiver ran down my spine. I found myself panting, as if I had just sprinted for miles. That's when I accepted that I might be caught up in something far beyond my rational understanding. My legs felt unsteady, and I wobbled against the edge of the fountain. I wanted to talk to anyone, share this horrifying experience. But I doubted anyone would believe me. There is no evidence except a string of useless photos, which refused to show his face. My mind throbbed with the memory of his words. "She doesn't belong here." That statement resonated within me as a warning, or perhaps a declaration of something bleak, indescribable. Summoning the last remnants of my courage, I forced myself to walk towards the center of the festival once more. Every step is a great effort. The possibility that I would ever see him again made my stomach turn. But an equal fear filled me at the thought of never knowing what he really was, or why he was targeting me. Everywhere I looked, I saw glimpses of him, or heard the virtual click of his camera shutter. I began to question my own sanity, half expecting the road to buckle under my feet or the lanterns to go out all at once. I pushed through the crowd, past another swirl of confetti, and the neon lights overhead flickered like an ominous omen. Sweat soaked my shirt. My pulse was pounding, and my breathing was so shallow that my chest began to ache. The noise of the festival filled my ears, sometimes suffocating me with its artificial, unnatural joy. The shadows stretched unnaturally, as if reaching out to trap me. My mind reeled with the belief that I would never be able to look at a festival the same way again. Despite the growing terror, a sudden determination took root in me. If I really don't belong there, I want to find out why. I peered into every corner, every crowd, looking for the last trace of him. But the more I searched, the more I realized the night was slipping away, and with it the fading chance of facing him again. The tension in the air seemed to gradually recede, replaced by an aching emptiness. The absence of that haunting presence, strangely enough, felt like an even more devastating torment. An unresolved horror. An open wound cannot heal. Finally, I found myself standing at the edge of the festival, where the lights had dimmed and the crowd had thinned. The music faded to a distant echo. My heart was still pounding, and every nerve in my body was still on high alert. Behind me, seemingly unaware of the horror that had stalked me all night, with a heavy feeling of resignation, I left the festival grounds and entered a quieter street. My legs felt shaky and the air had a foul taste in my mouth. My thoughts raced non-stop. Is that man a ghost? A trick of my overpowered mind? Or something much stranger? No matter how many times I turned that question over in my head, I couldn't reconcile it with any conventional explanation. I remember the cold grip of his presence, the blurry face in the photos, and the cold breath near my ear as he said those words. Even after he left, the chill remained in my bones. I kept walking, trying to put some distance between myself and that incredible view. But the relief I felt hollow. My skin prickled with the lingering certainty that his eyes might still be following me, invisible but powerful. By the time I reached my car, my breathing had calmed down a bit. Locked the door immediately. My fingers trembled on the ignition, as if I expected him to appear in the seat next to me at any moment. As I drove away, city lights flashed in the rearview mirror. The festival is still going on in the distance, a chaotic swirl of artificial light. My shoulders ached with tension, and my mind raced with the memory of his last statement. No part of me feels victorious. All I carried was lingering fear, pulsing under my skin like a latent infection. I wonder if I really don't belong here. What if I was somehow an intruder in a place that only tolerated my presence temporarily, until he arrived to shatter the illusion of safety? To this day, I often glance over my shoulder when I go out at night. The flash of a camera, or a strange light flashing at random, still makes me grit my teeth and my heart beat fast. The memory of his pure, haunting smile and the empty space where his face should have been continued to invade my dreams, leaving me gasping for sleep, with my heart pounding. He did not reappear. But I feel something different in a suggestion that I had seen too much, or perhaps too little. And whenever I feel a sudden cold wind on my neck, even in a closed room, I remember his whispered warning. It echoes in my mind, a lingering testimony of that strange night, reminding me that the real horror often lies in what remains unresolved, in the questions that will never be answered. There are fears that do not come from strangers, but from people we once knew, ghosts from the past that we thought were sleeping peacefully. I woke up one evening, my heart pounding as if some silent alarm had pulled me out of a deep sleep. The room felt colder than usual. Unusually cold. My breath caught in my throat as I exhaled small puffs of condensation into the air. I remember sitting up, feeling my t-shirt stick to my skin from cold sweat. Every inch of my body was tense with alertness. Even in that half-awake state, I could still feel that I was not completely alone. It was the first real sign that the reappearance of Drew, my old college roommate, was something out of the ordinary, and looking back, it was the moment that marked the beginning of a breathtaking horror that I never imagined I would face in my own home. I was 27 years old, living with my best friend, Todd, in a small rented house on the outskirts of the city. This place has always been peaceful, at least before. A tree-lined street out front, a backyard just big enough for a grill and a few lawn chairs, and windows that let in plenty of sunlight when the curtains are open. But after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I can enjoy sunlight that way anymore. I remember the day I received an unexpected text from Drew. We were dorm roommates in college, but were never really close. Our relationship is more like mutual tolerance than friendship. As soon as the semester ended, we went our separate ways. Nearly half a decade has passed, and I haven't heard anything about him. Then suddenly, he texted, saying he had just moved nearby and wanted to come visit to reminisce about the good old days. The message was brief and seemingly harmless, but it carried a strangely heavy atmosphere. Something intangible that twisted my stomach. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to just residual anxiety or discomfort from our shared past. But deep inside, I had a bad feeling that reconnecting with him would lead to trouble. I let Todd know that an old acquaintance would be stopping by. Todd is a pretty laid-back guy. He tells me to do what I feel like I need to do, but also teases me about how I seem a bit stressed. An old friend could help me relax. But I know it's not friendship that drives Drew. I felt like he was drawn to me, to something in my life. A pull that I couldn't explain. When Drew showed up at my door a few days later, I felt myself break out in an uncontrollable cold sweat for the first time. My palms were cold and my mouth was dry. I could see him through the small window in the door. He looked almost the same as he did in college, skinny, slightly hunched shoulders, a normal figure you wouldn't notice a second time. There was an empty darkness, a lifelessness in his eyes. An emptiness that gave me goosebumps. The air around him seemed thick, filled with static electricity. And as cliché as it may sound, I couldn't ignore the sudden chill that swept into the hallway as soon as I opened the door. A bone-chilling chill, as if someone had opened the freezer door right next to me in the middle of summer. I tried to breathe evenly, trying to keep my voice calm as I greeted him. As he entered the living room, the ceiling light flickered once and then went out for a moment before coming back on. I hastily came up with some excuse about the old wiring, but a vague fear rose in my heart. I remember the immediate tension in my shoulders, the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears, so loud it drowned out the rustle of the trees outside the window. Todd tried to have a civil conversation with Drew, or at least Todd tried. Drew mostly responded with awkward nods or short, monotonous answers. His eyes kept wandering around the room, but not really looking at anything in particular, like he was searching or waiting for something. I tried to join the conversation, but my throat felt as dry as sandpaper, and my heart didn't slow a beat. Luckily, he didn't stay too long. After he left, I paced the house, trying to figure out why I was so stressed. I dug through an old college photo album, wanting to see if I was overreacting, or simply dredging up old negative emotions. And that's when I saw them. In most photos of Drew's face, there appear to be strange black smudges around him. They are not like regular stains. They look like ink stains or mold slowly creeping in from the edges of the photo, but are concentrated around Drew's figure. The strange thing is that these photos are digital prints of the original files, and I have kept them very carefully in a sealed box. There is no reason for them to be damaged like that. I remember watching them many times in the past and the images were absolutely fine. Now it was as if an ominous shadow, an invisible rot, had crept into the very photographic paper, clinging to his image wherever he stood. I showed Todd a few pictures the next day, saying there was some strange discoloration. He initially assumed it was due to the old photo or the cheap quality of the ink, but then admitted that it was strange, especially the way the stains formed small, almost organic, had reacted with the chemicals over time. But seeing those dark spots made my stomach turn. Over the next week, Drew started finding reasons to stop by more often. Sometimes he appears unannounced, in the early evening or just after dusk. Always with the same blank, unblinking gaze and the cold atmosphere that followed. He evasively said he lived nearby, but never specified the address. That's weird, because our neighborhood is pretty small and I usually know if there are new residents moving in. And every time he comes, strange things happen in the house. A certain door will slam shut without any wind. Sometimes it's the front door, sometimes it's the closet door in my bedroom, sometimes it's the heavy door leading to the basement. The first few times, Todd and I blamed it on drafts or air pressure differences. But the doors banged loudly even when there were no nearby windows or vents open. At the same time, the lights in my bedroom started flickering and burning out more frequently. The light bulbs I had just replaced a few days earlier would go out with a soft pop, leaving me in sudden darkness, with my heart pounding. My nights became restless and full of nightmares. I kept dreaming of Drew's face, looming in the corner of my vision. In the dream, there was always a dense, shapeless shadow stretched out behind him, twitching and writhing like a living creature. I often wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I think I might pass out. Every morning when I wake up, I think of ways to avoid having to open the door for him if he stops by again. But every night, when I hear the familiar knock on my door, I find myself opening the door with a terrible chill running down my spine, trying to smile and appear calm. Drew never really said much during those visits. He just hangs around, sits silently in the living room, or wanders aimlessly around the house, like a shadow gradually covering my life. I started feeling insecure all the time, even when he wasn't there. The house seemed to have a different mood. Heavier and darker, like the walls themselves were watching me. Absorbing my fears. I often shiver involuntarily for no apparent reason. My skin was covered in goosebumps as if an invisible presence was hovering inches away. Then I started paying attention to him in places he shouldn't be. For example, one time I was home alone, standing in front of the bathroom mirror washing my face. When I looked up, for a split second, I saw Drew's reflection in the mirror, standing in the bathroom doorway. Head tilted slightly, eyes staring blankly at me. As soon as I turned around, the hallway was empty. There was no one there. Another time, I was heating food in the microwave and stared at the reflective surface of the black glass door. I could have sworn I saw someone standing right behind me. But when I returned, the kitchen was empty. My body locked in fear. And I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped the hot plate on the floor. One evening, after Drew had left, I found Todd sitting in the living room, looking pale and worried. He told me he hadn't seen anything as specifically strange as I had. But every time Drew was in the house, a heavy, oppressive feeling filled the space. Todd said he even lost focus at work because he kept dreading the moment he might hear Drew knocking on the door. He said it might be time for us to have a frank conversation with Drew and ask him to give us space. Although Todd admitted he felt very uncomfortable with the idea of confronting Drew directly, I tried talking to Drew indirectly via text, trying to learn more about why he continued to visit so often. He only responded with curt messages, offering no real explanation. And then, he appeared again the next day, with that same cold atmosphere and soulless eyes, never volunteering a reason for his presence. The rational part of me screamed that this behavior was wrong, it was invasive. My instinct told me to completely cut off contact with him. But there was a creepy feeling, a vague fear that Drew knew something I didn't. And maybe he was taking advantage of my fear in some way. I couldn't explain why I let it continue, why I couldn't just tell him to stop coming. It was as if I was paralyzed by the strangeness of the situation, unable to take a decisive action. In a fit of impulse and fear, I rummaged through old yearbooks and digital photo files on my computer, looking for more pictures of Drew. In almost every book, they clung to his form like a dark, greasy halo. And in some of the more recent photos I found on social media, the ones tagged with his name, those dark spots seemed to spread even further, stretching across the photo page like fingers or long tendrils of ink. My skin was covered in goosebumps. And I felt nauseous. My heart was beating so fast that I had to sit down and press my palms against my knees to stop them from shaking. I wonder if there could be some natural explanation, file corruption, screen display problem? But I couldn't ignore the feeling of claustrophobic dread that was no doubt coiling in my gut. It was around this time that I started to really doubt my own sanity. I found myself constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows, half expecting and half afraid to see him standing outside, just standing there, his eyes fixed on mine through the glass. I jumped every time there was a slight noise, a tree branch scraping against the house wall, a strong wind shaking the fence. My nights became an endless series of fitful sleeps and waking up in cold fear. Sometimes I wake up and swear I see a figure in the corner of the bedroom, looming near the closet door. But whenever I mustered up the courage to turn on the light, I saw nothing but an empty room and my racing heart. Todd tried to reassure me, although he admitted that he was equally confused and scared. He suggested we move, or at least temporarily stay in a hotel for a few days. But I hesitated. I felt so paranoid that I didn't dare leave the empty house. Something in me believed that if I left, Drew would follow. That invisible, bone-chilling presence would accompany me wherever I went. I was convinced that the darkness that clung to him was not only attached to him, but that it had somehow begun to creep into my world, into my home. As if I had accidentally allowed it in. Then came the night I found him outside my bedroom window. It was almost midnight, and I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with endlessly worried thoughts. I can't sleep. Finally, I decided to get up and go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I passed by the window in the hallway, I saw it. A tall figure was standing in the dim porch light in the backyard. My chest tightened. The figure just stood there, motionless, looking up at my window. Even through the darkness, I recognized that familiar pose, that exceptionally lean figure. It's Drew. I stiffened at the windowsill, my hands gripping the sill so hard that my fingernails dug into the wood. My vision darkened for a moment, and I had to remind myself to breathe. When I blinked and looked back, he was gone. Not a single movement, not a single sound. It was as if he had evaporated into the night air. My hands were shaking so much that the glass of water I had just taken almost slipped out of my hand and fell to the floor. The next morning, I pulled Todd into my room and explained everything in a low, urgent voice. He listened, his face tense and worried. He didn't refute what I said. In fact, he revealed that he had also noticed strange footprints in the backyard that morning. The footprints were bare and didn't match either of our shoe sizes. They led from the fence straight to the side of the house, right under my bedroom window, and then mysteriously disappeared. Todd suggested calling someone. Could be the police. Or even a private security company. But we both know what we're going to say. Our old friend keeps showing up uninvited, leaving strange black marks in photos, burning out light bulbs, and peeping out windows at night. It sounds like we're the unstable ones. I started to feel unwell. That same day, Todd went to work while I stayed home. I took a few days off because I couldn't concentrate on work at the office. The house was painfully quiet, and that silence made my skin crawl even more. I locked all the doors and pulled down all the curtains, leaving only a single light in the living room. Every slightest creak on the floor made my pulse pound. It was mid-afternoon, when the light outside was starting to fade. I heard footsteps. The footsteps were very faint, almost inaudible, in the hallway just outside the living room. My chest convulsed with fear. I grabbed the cord of the light that was on, ready to pull it out of the socket if the overhead light flickered again. And as expected, as soon as I stood up, the light bulb in the desk lamp turned on and then went out. Darkness filled the living room, except for the faint light filtering through the closed window curtains. I stood there, almost completely still in the dark, breathing raggedly, trying to suppress the urge to scream or run. My whole body trembled, and my mouth was so dry that I could barely swallow. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, trying to tell myself that it was just my imagination, just stress playing with my mind. Then I heard it. The faint creaking sound, typical of basement door hinges. My stomach tightened. That door was old and we rarely used the basement, but it had a very distinct creak that I couldn't mistake. I forced myself to move towards it, my heart beating so hard that I felt a dull ache in my chest. When I reached the top of the stairs leading to the basement, the smell of damp concrete and stale, stagnant air filled my nose. The basement door was ajar, even though I was 100% sure that I had locked it before. I turned on the light switch in the basement. This time, the light bulb did not go off. It emitted a faint yellow light, illuminating the dusty stairs. I walked down slowly. My legs felt like they were made of jelly, my whole body was so tense that every step made my muscles ache. The basement was empty. Just a pile of old boxes, discarded furniture, and spider webs. But the air here seems heavier than ever, as if a storm cloud has settled. Within these cold concrete walls, I stood in the middle of the room, straining my ears to listen. His own breathing sounded deafening in the oppressive silence. Then suddenly, without warning, the light above me flickered several times, casting strange dancing shadows across the floor and concrete walls. My own shadow stretched out unnaturally. And for a terrifying split second, it looked as if another figure was standing right behind me, blending into my shadow. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze. I turned around quickly. Still don't see anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling of something just grazing my shoulder. A touch as light as air but cold. My skin tingled where I felt that ghostly contact. I ran away, rushing back upstairs, slamming the basement door behind him and locking it twice with the bolt. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I stood with my back against that door for a long moment, panting, trying to convince myself that I was in control of the situation. But the fear is too great, too real. It's not just an ordinary fear. It was a deep, fundamental certainty that something unnatural, something evil, was surrounding me, infiltrating this house. I could almost feel that darkness thickening in the air, in my throat. That evening, when Todd came home, the sun had set and the house was filled with long darkness. I told him immediately, I can't stay here anymore. My voice was shaky and my hands were still shaking from the basement. He didn't argue. He agreed immediately, saying we should go to his parents' house across town right away. We hastily packed a few essentials into our bags, our hearts pounding with every little noise in the house. I caught myself constantly glancing toward the window, half expecting and half afraid to see Drew's face there, watching us. Just before we were about to leave, there was a light knock at the front door. We both stiffened. My skin was covered in goosebumps so intense it was almost painful. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A cold, extreme terror shot through me. Todd put his hand on the doorknob, but I stopped him. I felt cold metal under my palm and a voice inside begged me not to open it. But my heart was pounding like a war drum, making it hard to hear anything else. My breathing hitched as I slowly turned the doorknob, fear clinging to every movement. Standing on the porch was Drew, still with the same blank, emotionless expression. The weak streetlights cast strange shadows around him, making his skinny body look frighteningly elongated and skewed. The air around him turned cold instantly, as if an Arctic blast of air had just swept across my yard. I felt my teeth start to chatter. That bone-chilling cold invaded me again. And this time, in the dim light of the porch light, I noticed something different. A mist, almost pitch black, surrounded his shoulders. It was like curling smoke, or a faint shape trying to cling to him. It's not my imagination. This was as real as fear burning in my veins. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me, his eyes as empty as two black holes. Todd took a step back, almost tripping over his own feet, and stood behind me, taking a sharp breath. I also felt something else on the porch. An invisible presence curled up in the darkness right behind Drew. A wave of nausea washed over me, and my vision blurred for a second. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to slam the door. But then, something in my mind snapped. An unexpected protest. A desperate need to fight whatever force he brought with him. I tried to keep my voice calm, even though it was still shaking. I told him we were leaving, and he needed to go now. He tilted his head, a slow, almost mechanical gesture. As if he was considering my words. Then he took a step forward. My heart pounded in protest, and every hair on my body stood up with fear. But then I raised my hand, palm facing him, an instinctive restraining gesture. I repeated, my voice a little louder, more firmly, that he needed to go. Go away, Drew. We don't want you here anymore. The atmosphere seemed to change in that moment. The cold persisted, but Drew seemed hesitant. The shadowy shadows around him flickered, almost as if they were shrinking. Reacting to my sudden protest. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline that made my shaking legs a little more steady. With my words still shaky, I told him I didn't want him to visit anymore, no more unannounced drop-ins. My breathing was shallow, but my voice was surprisingly firm. He stared a moment longer, his vacant eyes seemingly trying to penetrate me. Then, he took a step back, then another. An expression of what could have been annoyance, or perhaps disappointment, flashed across his usually expressionless features. He turned and walked into the night, disappearing behind the weak light of the streetlight. The oppressive cold eased a little, but did not disappear completely. The porch remained significantly colder than the rest of the surrounding air. Todd and I quickly locked the door, grabbed our things, and rushed out to his car. My heart didn't stop pounding until we were miles away from that house. We stayed at Todd's parents' house for the next few nights. I didn't sleep well at all, constantly haunted by thoughts of Drew lurking outside the window, or images of black spots on old photos. When we finally mustered up the courage to go back home, I prepared myself for the worst. Perhaps the house was broken into, the light bulb burned out again, or the basement door opened again. But instead, I found everything locked up, just the way we left it. Inside, the darkness no longer seemed so threatening. But I couldn't ignore the heavy, gloomy feeling that still lingered in the air. As if something had seeped into the walls and corners of the house. Some residue of that presence. I still find myself occasionally looking over my shoulder in the hallway, especially at dusk. The lights don't go off as often anymore, but sometimes I still hear the door rattling when there's no draft. And occasionally, in the quieter hours of the night, a silhouette that fades even as I try to focus on it. I couldn't say for sure whether Drew was really gone or if he was just waiting somewhere. But I knew that something about him had changed. Or perhaps something that had always been there without me realizing it. Something that can't be explained by mere coincidence or old grudges. Todd wants us to eventually move completely, and I agree that might be best. But I'm not entirely convinced that leaving this house will free me from the horrors that Drew has brought into my life. There is a permanent awareness now, seared into my mind, a fear that lives under my skin, tearing up every time I remember the dark streaks in those photos. Part of me wonders if this feeling of insecurity follows me wherever I go. An invisible mark left by a man I never really knew, and by the rank something, whatever it was, might have been nagging at him all along. Even if I never saw him again, I could never forget the dark fog that seemed to wrap around him, or the way doors slammed shut on their own when he was near. Or the paralyzing, primal fear that tormented me every time he appeared in my reflection when I was alone. Some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed. And now, sometimes, when I stand here, staring at my reflection in the mirror late at night, my heart pounding in my chest, I swear I catch a glimpse of Drew standing right behind me. Just for a moment. Chills ran down my spine again. And a single thought presented itself to me, perhaps in the first place. He was never just an ordinary man. And perhaps I had invited something far worse into my home than an unwelcome ex-roommate. There are places that carry echoes of the past, marks that cannot be erased by a new coat of paint or hasty renovation. As soon as I first set foot in that basement apartment, I felt something was wrong. The air was too still, almost stagnant. The shadows along the hallway leading down seemed too long, too dark. Causeless feeling of fear. I remember standing hesitantly in the doorway for a long time, feeling as if I had entered a space not meant for me. As if I were intruding on something old and wary. But I told myself I was being paranoid. The rent was very cheap, and the landlord assured me that the space had just been completely renovated. Just an old house, he said. With a bit of character. That's what I tried to convince myself. Looking back, I realized that I should have paid more attention to those subtle warnings, to the biting cold that lingered in the air even on a warm summer day. Perhaps that could have saved me from long nights of endless fear and a final moment of indescribable terror. I moved in on a cloudy afternoon. My breath seemed to catch in my throat every time I looked at the old rickety wooden stairs leading from the main floor to the basement. The walls are painted light gray, but instead of making the space brighter, my living area is basically one large L-shaped room, awkwardly divided by an old bookshelf and a half-mezzanine wall to create a kitchen area. A narrow, dark hallway leads to a small bathroom and an even smaller built-in closet. It's an odd layout, believed to be the result of a hasty, patchy renovation by the previous owner. Almost immediately, little things began to upset me, planting the first seeds of insecurity. On the first night, as I was unpacking and putting books on the shelf, I heard light shuffling right outside my door, in the common hallway of the basement, even though I was the only tenant here. It sounded like thick fabric rubbing against the wall, and very slow, heavy footsteps. I froze on the spot, my heart pounding in my chest, straining my ears to listen. The sound lasted about a minute and then stopped suddenly. Just as I held my breath to concentrate better. I told myself that it was just my imagination, combined with the groans and natural noises of an old building settling at night. A few days later, I started smelling a strange smell. It smelled old and musty, like the smell of damp earth mixed with the smell of old, dusty fabric. That scent seemed to waft throughout the narrow hallway leading to the bathroom. At first, I thought the smell was seeping in from some hidden corner of the old house, maybe from the basement that hadn't been completely renovated. After all, old buildings often have those characteristic musty smells. But I find myself constantly checking the corners and floors of my apartment, certain that I'll find evidence of mold or water damage. But nothing. The walls are dry, the floors are still sturdy. Became stronger, more concentrated, as if its source was drawing closer. I try to maintain my daily routine, cook simple meals, clean, read. Try to keep my mind busy. But every now and then, I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was the unmistakable feeling of being watched by someone, an invisible gaze that I couldn't see. My muscles tensed unconsciously, and my heart beat faster. Then I forced myself to exhale slowly, looked around the empty room, and realized that I was completely alone, at least visually. That uncomfortable feeling, however, never completely goes away. If anything, it seemed to build up over time, like a dull, slow fear rising in my mind. The homeowner, a tired-looking middle-aged man, occasionally walks through the house during the day to check the heating system. Or make sure the old pipes don't leak. One afternoon, while checking the rattling radiator in the hallway, he casually mentioned that this house had long ago belonged to a family with a rather strange collection. He talked about it briefly, almost indifferently, as if it were just a trivial matter. That those former residents went everywhere to collect strange artifacts, ancient items that were rumored to have unclear origins, and that they were once scattered around every corner of the house. He added that he had heard rumors that some of the most valuable or problematic items were hidden in walls or under floorboards before the family left or died. I remember feeling a cold wave of unease roll over me when I heard that. The thought of living in a space that might contain hidden objects, trinkets or curiosities of unknown origin, makes me shudder. The idea of accidentally finding a relic while cleaning or repairing gave me chills, although I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just my overactive imagination being stimulated by the landlord's story. But night after night, the footsteps in the hallway became more and more regular. At first, it was just a few carefully measured steps, echoing in the narrow hallway next to my apartment. The pace was slow, deliberate, almost like the footsteps of someone using a cane, although I never heard the characteristic tap of any cane. Just the sound of rhythmic, heavy footsteps slowly moving towards my door, then stopping just outside, and finally disappearing into silence. I opened the door a few times as soon as the footsteps stopped, thinking that perhaps an upstairs neighbor had accidentally wandered down here. Or maybe the landlord had come back because he had forgotten something. But I never found anyone. The hallways are always empty and silent. I remember one evening, I had just finished washing the dishes and was drying my hands on a kitchen towel. Suddenly, the lights on the kitchen ceiling flickered violently and then dimmed significantly. My heart seemed to skip a beat. These bulbs are quite new, why are they like that? They buzzed faintly for a few seconds, then suddenly returned to full. I could have sworn I saw a silhouette. A tall and irregularly shaped figure was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, which opened into the hallway. It stood there, completely motionless. A cold air surrounded me instantly. I opened my mouth to scream, but when the light returned to normal, there was still no one there. The hallway is empty. But this time I'm sure I didn't imagine it. My palms were covered in cold sweat, and my pulse was pounding in my ears. I spent the rest of that evening jumping at the slightest sound, whether the refrigerator beeped or the water dripped. By my second week there, the sound of footsteps had become an almost nightly time. Darkness fell, as if my body was instinctively preparing for whatever might be lurking out there in the hallway. To make matters worse, the only light bulb on the ceiling of the hallway, which was already weak, now began to flicker more frequently. And sometimes, during those flashes, I see fleeting movements at the edge of my vision. A flash of light like someone's heel turning a dark corner, or a vague rustle like the tails of someone's coat just disappearing around a bend. Each time, I felt an icy fear run through my chest. One night, things escalated in such a way that I felt like I was reaching the breaking point. I was lying in bed, trying my best to fall asleep even though an uncomfortable, uneasy feeling was still coiling in my stomach. Then I heard footsteps again. This time slower, clearer than ever. They stopped right outside my door. My throat was dry, and I could barely breathe or swallow. My heart was beating so loudly that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Drawing courage from some unknown source, perhaps desperation, I jumped out of bed and yanked the door open. The ceiling light in the hallway was flickering weakly, emitting only a dull, sickly yellow light. And standing there, right in the middle of the narrow hallway, was a man. A man I had never seen before. He was wearing an old-fashioned suit. A dark jacket with wide lapels that looked decades out of date. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that partially obscured his face. His face, the part one could see, was pale and gaunt. Like a faded portrait in an old photograph. But the strangest thing, what made my blood freeze, was his ghostly transparency. I could see his features clearly, but the details seemed washed out, faded. As if all the color had been sucked from him. There was a strange, almost imperceptible light surrounding him, making him look like a gray memory. Coming to life, a hazy hologram. My body convulsed in panic. My breathing became ragged and rapid, and cold sweat broke out along my forehead. As I stood there, frozen in stunned terror, the man began to slowly extend an arm towards me. Every hair on my arm's end, neck stood up in alarm. The temperature around me dropped suddenly. I could see my breath forming a thin mist in front of my face for a moment. My teeth started chattering because of the cold. I felt an overwhelming urge to turn around and run away, slamming the door, but my feet were frozen to the floor, refusing to move. I watched numbly as his ghostly hand inched closer and closer. His fingers were long and pale. It was as if he was reaching towards me. Or perhaps trying to grasp something right in front of my chest. Something invisible that only he could see. My heart was pounding, aching in my chest. Just as I couldn't bear it anymore and reflexively closed my eyes, I heard a slight whoosh sound. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. Completely disappeared. As if he was never there. Only the lingering, bone-chilling cold remained in the air and the smell of moldy soil seemed stronger. I staggered back, slamming the door with a shaking hand. My mind was spinning with a series of unanswered questions. Did I really see that? Or is this some elaborate trick of my overtired, anxious brain? Even so, the chill in the air felt very real. And there was nothing imaginary about my ragged breathing and my heart beating like it was about to burst. The next morning, I confronted the landlord in the kitchen upstairs. My voice trembled even though I tried my best to stay calm. I was careful to speak indirectly about the strange noises, the lighting problems, and the feeling of unease, not wanting to sound like I was accusing him of anything, or worse, that I was losing my mind. He listened, and strangely, he didn't seem surprised at all. He sighed, looked out the window, and then slowly mentioned that, according to what he had heard from previous tenants and old neighbors, strange things had been rumored to happen in this house for decades. According to him, the family that once owned it did not just collect typical antiques. They are also said to have collected items rumored to be cursed, haunted, or possessed by restless spirits. He shrugged nonchalantly, as if it were a common thing, and suggested that maybe a certain presence was still attached to the house, especially the basement where many old objects were stored or hidden. I felt sick to my stomach, partly from fear, partly from anger. How could he rent me this basement apartment without warning me about any of this? From that point on, my only focus was on how to survive until my lease ended. Every day, I try to stay away from the apartment as much as possible. I go to work early and come home late, or walk around the neighborhood for hours after work. But inevitably, I still have to go back there eventually. And each night brings new horrors, trickling but persistent. It was never as dramatic as the full apparition of the ghost in the hallway. But it was the small, constant events that chipped away at my sanity. I once walked into the living area and found a strange, dusty fingerprint on the edge of the sofa, which I must have cleaned the day. The fingers seemed longer than usual, as if the hand that made it was not entirely human. Another time, I woke up in the early hours of the morning to find the overhead light in the hallway was on and flickering. I was 100% sure I turned it off before going to bed. My physical reaction to fear became more difficult to control. My hands began to shake uncontrollably every time I approached the apartment door in the evening. My breathing was always shallow and rapid, and cold sweat often appeared on my upper lip. I started seeing shadows moving along the wall out of the corner of my eye more often. But when I turned around to look directly, there was never anything there. My mind is always on high alert. My ears caught every slightest creak, every slightest change in temperature, every faint breeze passing through the cracks around the old window. At times, the terror made me feel almost suffocated, as if an invisible heavy blanket was pressing down on my chest. I lost a significant amount of weight because my appetite was almost non-existent. Sleeping pills became a necessity just so I could get a few hours of rest each night, even though they couldn't completely stop the nightmares that haunted me. In those dreams, the man in the antique suit always stood at the edge of my vision, always reaching out, always trying to pull me closer. Distorted. More than once, I wondered if I was actually losing touch with my sanity. Could all of this be explained by isolation, extreme stress, or maybe even an undetected carbon monoxide leak that is causing hallucinations? I called in an expert to test the air for carbon monoxide and mold, looking for anything tangible, any reasonable explanation for these bizarre phenomena. But the test results all came back normal. There was no gas leak, no dangerous mycotoxins, no reasonable explanation at all. I was left alone with an uneasy feeling, with the terrifying reality that what I experienced might be real. I've finally reached the last week of my lease. I looked like a cripple from lack of sleep and stress. My eyes were sunken and looked empty, my nerves were extremely stressed. However, strangely enough, I also feel a strange burst of energy creeping through me every day, knowing that I am about to escape from this place. I packed my things as quickly as I could, stacking the boxes in the corner of the living room. I tried my best to ignore the feeling that someone was watching my every move from the dark hallway. Whenever that familiar cold feeling creeps up the back of my neck, I force myself to continue packing, refusing to look over my shoulder. On my last night in that apartment, I half expected and half feared an all-out attack from whatever was lurking. A heavy, oppressive silence. I remember lying on the mattress on the floor, my bed frame had been disassembled and packed, staring at the ceiling, too scared to sleep. That ominous silence was like the stillness before a big storm hits. My eyelids felt heavy from exhaustion. Then, in that almost complete silence, I heard it. One last time. Footsteps in the hallway. This time it was so close it could have been right behind my door. My pulse was pounding. I held my breath, waiting. The door handle never turns. And no footsteps followed. Just a single, deliberate sound, then silence again. When the weak morning light finally filtered through the tiny windows near the basement ceiling, I jumped out of bed with a determination fueled by fear and hope for liberation. The landlord stopped by in the morning, asking when I would hand over the keys. I just said indirectly that I would leave as soon as the delivery truck arrived. He nodded half-heartedly, his eyes avoiding me, as if he knew exactly why I was leaving in such a hurry, but didn't dare say it out loud. I felt one last shiver as I locked the apartment door for the last time. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Until I climbed all those rickety stairs and closed the basement door tightly behind me. I wish I could say it was over when I left that house. That I never felt that presence again. But the truth is more worrying than that. Even in my new place, a modern apartment building with bright lighting and no quaint corners, there are still moments. Those moments late at night, when the air in the room suddenly becomes unusually cold. Or when I hear a gentle creak from the hallway outside. It sounds like a floorboard being weighed down by a cautious step. Then I looked around again, my heart pounding, and saw only my familiar furniture, the pure white walls, and my own reflection in the dark window. But the memory of that colorless face, of the ghostly hand reaching out, still lingers. Sometimes I catch myself unconsciously expecting to see a shadowy ghost in the corner of the room. My pulse would spike again, and my throat would tighten with dryness, reminding me of those long, terrifying nights in the basement. In the end, there was no dramatic confrontation, no physical injuries, no clear explanation at all. The real horror lay in the gnawing fear that slowly crept up on me during those weeks and never seemed to completely let go. I escaped that basement when perhaps there is a lesson buried somewhere in that ordeal. Perhaps some places actually hold on to the energies of the past, refusing to let them disappear. Or maybe it's a warning that certain artifacts, certain histories, always leave their mark, no matter how much new paint or renovation tries to cover it up. Even now, just recounting those events sends chills down my spine and my body tenses as I recall the ghostly touch of that hand. The memories are so vivid that sometimes I wonder how I could have convinced myself to stay there for so long. I suppose at that moment I tried to cling to what was left of my reason, believing that I could get through if I just endured it a little longer. But that rational part was severely beaten and eroded in that house. It's all over. I remind myself of that truth whenever old terrors resurface. I was no longer in that cold, dark hallway, facing a figure who shouldn't exist. I left the smell of moldy earth, flickering lights, and eerie silence behind. But its imprint is still there, buried deep in my senses, ready to surface in the darkest hours. I think that's the real obsession. Not a ghostly figure in old clothes. It's a nagging fear that reality is perhaps less stable than I once believed. That at some point, some door might open in the middle of the night and reveal something I cannot fully explain, reaching out to me with a terrible, bone-chilling cold. Even though I escaped that apartment, I couldn't escape the knowledge that these things, these presences, might still be there, lurking in places just beyond our ordinary vision. And the scariest thing is how easily we can come across them, just for a cheap rent in an old house, or the promise of a quaint living space full of personality. Having said all that, I can only say this. If you ever feel a cold hand on your shoulder while you're alone in a dark hallway, think very carefully before you turn around. Some things, once seen, can never truly be seen again. I remember the exact moment the atmosphere in that old inn changed. A second ago, the long and narrow hallway outside my room was quiet and silent, with only the familiar creaking sound of the old wooden floor under the feet of other guests in the distance. The next second, a sudden cold wind, coming from nowhere, swept through the hallway, carrying with it the faint but clear sound of something heavy rubbing against wood. Not a sharp scratching sound like the old porch, but a slow, heavy grinding sound. My heart staggered at that sudden noise, and every hair on my arm stood up. That's how it always seems to start, right? A subtle disturbance in the silence. A chill seemed to rise from the very floorboards, and an overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. Something terrible was about to happen. I had gone to that in just a few days earlier, looking for a quiet, affordable place to stay temporarily while I looked for a long-term rental in a small town a few miles away. The building was visibly old, a two-story wooden structure with a roof that seemed to sag slightly in the middle, walls painted a pale gray that might once have been pure white, and a walkway lined with chipped stones that led to a heavy, ornate wooden door that had faded with age. The innkeeper, a quiet man with a dry voice, briefly explained that the inn had been renovated here and there during its more than a century of existence. When I crossed the threshold for the first time, I noticed the distinct stench of old carpets and dusty curtains, tinged with something vaguely akin to old disinfectants or preservatives, as if the place had at one time been used for something more than just boarding. My room was on the second floor, at the end of a narrow, dark hallway that wound around the rickety main, mainly coming from a few low-power ceiling bulbs that often flickered or were simply too dim. Finding the right key to open the door at night is always a bit of a challenge, when the only light illuminating the hallway often comes from a weak, dull yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the hallway. What I noticed from the first evening was how cold that hallway was, especially near the communal bathroom at the end of the hallway, not far from my room. Even when I asked the manager if the heating system was working properly, he just shrugged and muttered something about the old building's insulation not being very good, but insisted that the rooms themselves were warm enough. I tried not to focus on it, but with each passing night, I found myself becoming more and more sensitive to that sudden drop in temperature every time I passed the end of the hallway. It felt as if that very hallway was breathing an icy breath into the back of my neck. On the second night I was there, I was awakened around 2 a.m. by a loud, echoing bang. My heart immediately jumped into my throat, and my palms began to sweat coldly. For a moment, I wondered if there had been an accident on the stairs, or if someone drunk had fallen into a door somewhere. As I sat up and gingerly opened my door a crack, listening, I heard another explosion, this time seemingly coming from the end of the hallway. It sounded very much like the sound of a bathroom door being slammed shut violently. I tried to reason that it might just be the wind blowing through some open window, or perhaps it was the natural elasticity of old wood. My breath hitched as I cautiously stepped out into the hallway, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. I slowly approached the bathroom door at the end of the hallway. When I got there, I found it tightly closed. The hallway became strangely quiet again. That silence was somehow even more disturbing than the loud thumping from before. There were no footsteps, no sign that anyone had been there. The next morning, after a restless night of sleep, I told my landlord about the noise. He glanced at me almost contemptuously, muttered something about old door frames expanding and contracting in the cold, then quickly changed the subject. His casual, almost dismissive attitude didn't exactly reassure me. But I tried to convince myself that he was probably right. Old buildings often make strange noises. I tried to focus on my daytime job of finding a house, but I still couldn't forget the powerful, distinct force behind that door slamming sound. It was not at all like the sound of a door being gently blown by the wind. It was as if someone, or something, had used all their strength to slam that door shut. Another day passed without any major incidents, although the atmosphere around the bathroom area at the end of the hallway remained uncomfortably cold. That night, the door banged again. This time it was two consecutive. Investigate. My heart was pounding in my chest like it was about to burst. Chilled to the bone, I closed my eyes tightly, trying to ignore it. But then I heard the floor creaking right outside my door. Slow, heavy creaks, as if someone was shuffling past. I held my breath, praying that those footsteps would continue down the stairs. Or toward the main entrance at the other end of the hallway. Instead, they stopped. Right in front of my room. I felt a sudden rush of panic rise in my throat as I lay motionless on the bed, waiting for what might happen. Only a heavy, suffocating silence weighed me down, lasting seemingly forever. Until finally, exhausted, I was able to fall into a fitful, anxious sleep. By the time the third night rolled around, I was completely exhausted and stressed. I told myself I had to thoroughly investigate this matter. Living in that constant state of fear and uncertainty is driving me crazy. My logic at the time was simple: if I could prove to myself that it was Justin causing the noise, then maybe I would be able to sleep better. That night, I got ready. I left the night light on and sat in bed reading a book, trying to stay awake. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I heard the first loud thump echoing through the thin walls of the inn. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Adrenaline began to run through my veins. My hands were shaking and my mouth was dry. I left the room and walked out into the hallway dimly lit by a single overhead light. The old musty smell of the hallway carpet seemed more pungent than usual. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid I might wake any of the other guests just by standing there and breathing. The bathroom door at the end of the hallway slammed shut again. Just as I started walking towards it, my breathing grew weaker, my chest tightening with each step on the cold wooden floor, trying to push me back into my room. But I kept going, driven by frustration and the need to find an explanation. As I approached the bathroom door, I noticed that the cold in here was even more intense than usual. I reached out, intending to grasp the cold metal doorknob. But before my fingers could touch it, I heard another sound from inside the bathroom. A sound that made my blood freeze. It was a sobbing sound. The cry of a child. Very quiet, almost drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat, but unmistakable. A painful, suppressed sob. I stood frozen in front of the door. Extreme fear made me unable to move. The crying continued for a few more seconds, then suddenly stopped. The silence returned, heavier and more terrifying than before. I don't know how long I stood there. A few seconds? A few minutes? Finally, I slowly backed away, step by step, never taking my eyes off the closed bathroom door. I turned around and practically ran back to my room, slamming the door and locking it. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, I packed my things as quickly as possible, not even bothering to eat breakfast. When I returned the key to the homeowner, I said nothing about the crying. I'll just say that I found a new place to live. Earlier than expected. He just nodded, didn't ask any more questions. His eyes were still indifferent as usual. As I drove away from that old inn, I couldn't help but glance back at the second-floor window where my room used to be. And I had the chilling feeling that perhaps the banging on the door and the crying were not random events. Perhaps they were part of some sad story trapped within the old walls of the inn, a painful echo from the past that refused to sleep. When I'm alone in a strange room, I can swear I hear the faint echo of a distant sobbing, or the sound of a door slamming shut at the end of the hallway. Uninvited echoes, reminding me of the ghosts lurking just below the surface of the ordinary world, waiting to be heard.